Appearance on Dion's Daily Dose does not imply endorsement from or by any candidate or guest. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by Dion Bergeron or Dion's Daily Dose are his own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any guest. Material and information presented is for general information purposes only. The Dion's Daily Dose name in all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owners, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. If you'd like to support the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/DionsDailyDose.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's episode of Dion's Daily Dose presents Face to Face with Dion and Shawn. You're supposed to say something. No, it's okay. I'm just messing around, man. Welcome, Shawn. There he is.
Thank you.
For our new viewers, listeners, whomever, my name is Dion Bergeron. I'm the host of Dion's Daily Dose. And for a quick background, I was a trucker trainer for the fourth largest trucking company in America for about a decade. I've been to 48 of 50 states. I was a correctional officer at Indiana State Prison for 7 years. I've done real estate. I've been on oil rigs. I've done a lot. I've seen pretty much a good chunk of what this country has to offer. I tend to follow more alternative media. I tend to consume sources, citizen journalists, X, True Social, things like that. Whereas Shawn is much more mainstream. Fox News, CBS, NBC, that kind of thing. I think it provides a excellent dichotomy, and we are constantly learning from each other. There are many articles he shared with me that I'm like, ooh, I didn't see this. And a couple every once in a while that I share with him, he's like, yeah, I didn't see that. Vast majority is you're like, yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. But they do exist. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, today the subject of discussion is the Safer Banking Act. That's SAFER. And why is it safer? I have no idea. I'm going to look into it. I have not had a chance to read it. Shawn gave it to us, and we're going to dive right in. All right. So let's get to this. There it is. Okay. So the top, we have a massive header that talks about premium CBD oil. It says CBD oil is displayed at the Cannabis World Congress and Business Exposition, or CWCB Expo trade show in New York City, New York, US, May 30th, 2019. And it's marked from March 13th, 2024. It seems like every year for the past 5 years, the same article gets written about the imminent passage, and I've heard this every year, of the Secure and Fair Enforcement Regulation Banking Act. So that's the SAFER acronym, Secure and Fair Enforcement Regulation Banking Act. It's quite a mouthful. Known formerly as the Secure and Fair Enforcement Act. Yet there is no reason for optimism that 2024 might finally be the year this happens, because on September 27, 2023, the SAFER Banking Act made it out of the Senate Banking Committee by a vote of 14-9. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, DNY, has indicated that cannabis banking reform is among the Senate's top priorities in 2024. Well, it's good to know they have priorities other than shipping all our money overseas. Therefore, it is worthwhile to take a look at what the SAFER Banking Act would and would not do for the financial ecosystem of the state legal cannabis industry in the form it was considered in 2023. An overview of the SAFER Banking Act. As things stand today, the majority of financial institutions, including essentially all major banks, remain reluctant to do business with cannabis and cannabis-adjacent businesses, while the plant remains illegal under federal law. I can understand that, because if you remember back in the Obama administration, when states were first, testing the waters for legalization in their state, there were several raids of growers and various dispensaries. I mean, quite a few. It was certainly an interesting time. In addition, back to the article, even when banking services such as deposit accounts are available, access to funding for cannabis-related businesses remains constrained. In its current form, the Safer Banking Act is aimed mostly at expanding access to traditional banking, but it does not extend protections to ancillary capital market participants that support the broader ecosystem. It's a whole lot of big words, man. What does that mean? What does that mean? It says there are very real challenges that the Safer Banking Act attempts to tackle. Many state legal cannabis businesses have difficulty accessing or affording deposit accounts, lines of credit, and other financial services in the cannabis industry. As again, most major banks remain unwilling to undertake the regulatory burden of complying with FinCEN's requirements for providing banking services to cannabis-related businesses. You know what FinCEN is?
I'm not sure.
Let's take a look. It says Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
Okay.
So FinCEN, they're the ones who go after the bank if they, don't like the fact that they have something to do with a cannabis-related business. Failure to abide by those requirements exposes financial institutions to significant risk under federal law. And most financial institutions have made the decision that providing services to state-compliant cannabis businesses is simply not worth the risk.
Imagine how big the market would be if they did pass this.
Exactly. I mean,
because it's going up now.
We actually were just talking about a show on another show we did. We were just talking about that where they're projecting $250 billion for the cannabis industry come 2030. I mean, $250+ billion industry.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. The Safer Banking Act, which has generated support on both sides of the aisle. Okay, so it's either really good or really bad. One of the two. That's the only two things that seem to bring those sides together. Aims to expand access to traditional financial and banking services by creating broader and less onerous safe harbor protections. For example, good. Give me examples because I don't know what that means. For example, the Act provides a, quote, safe harbor from certain criminal, civil, and administrative penalties, including criminal, civil, or administrative forfeiture to financial institutions, lenders, insurers, and others serving the cannabis industry, ensuring they are not penalized for offering services to state legal cannabis businesses. I'd say that's pretty important. And extends protections to mortgage lending, payment processing, and more. There was actually a huge rash of robberies of cannabis dispensaries because it's a cash for a long time, cash based only. Now there are a few handfuls of debit and credit cards that you can get that you can use in their store, but that's very recent. There for a long time, it was purely cash based and people would rob them left and right. The Act also creates common sense standard. Oh God, I always hate when I see that. Common sense reform, common sense this reform, common sense that reform. You know what I'm talking about. Standards for banks and credit unions to maintain customer relationships and to expand access to deposit accounts for underbanked groups such as state legal cannabis businesses. The Act also addresses some of the continued challenges faced by hemp-related businesses, acknowledging that despite hemp's legalization under the 2018 Farm Bill, a lot of people forget about that, some hemp businesses continue to have difficulty gaining access to traditional financial and banking services, especially businesses involved in the sale of hemp-derived CBD products, due to uncertainty about the legal status of some of those products.
And we've talked about that before.
We've talked about that before with various attorney generals wanting to go after CBD-based things, despite it being legal. It's unfortunate. Very, very unfortunate. The Safer Banking Act requires each chambering regulator to update guidance related to providing financial services to legitimate hemp-related businesses and hemp-related service providers. In other words, each person has to update it themselves. I think that's what that means.
Yeah.
How might the Safer Banking Act impact the industry? While some banks, credit unions, and other financial service providers currently serve the industry, the majority of state legal, medical, or recreational cannabis businesses do not participate in traditional banking and financial services due to cannabis's continued illegality under federal law. Indeed, only about 10% of all U.S. banks and about 5% of all credit unions provide cannabis-related businesses with accounts, which, to offset onerous compliance costs, often impose onerous service fees. See this article, High and Dry Banking Crisis to Further Choke Funding for Cannabis section, Reuters, March 24, 2023. Industry watchers anticipate the Safer Banking Act could address many of these issues by reducing safety risks associated with dealing with large amounts of cash. We were just talking about that, which makes cannabis businesses vulnerable to theft, fraud, and violence. Increasing access to capital and credit for cannabis businesses, including small and minority-owned business, which often face difficulties in obtaining financing. Improving the transparency and accountability of the cannabis industry by enabling financial institutions to track, report, and comply with anti-money laundering laws. Stimulating the growth and development of the cannabis industry and its related sectors, such as real estate, by normalizing financial transactions for cannabis businesses, and by creating more opportunities for investment, acquisition, leasing, and expansion of cannabis properties. Despite these potential benefits, there are still important industry-wide issues the Safer Banking Act does not fully address or resolve. Most significantly, the act does not affect cannabis's legality under federal law. Rather, the act only seeks to resolve the tension between federal and state law with respect to banking, lending to, and insuring state legal cannabis businesses.
Which is fair to, this should only pertain to those that have already legalized marijuana.
Right. It shouldn't apply to those that it's still illegal. I mean, you can't set up an account at Chase as a street dealer,
No.
It's just, yeah. Although what's interesting is you can actually be targeted by the IRS for not reporting your income from criminal enterprises. That's how they got Al Capone.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. This means that cannabis businesses and consumers will continue to face legal risks and uncertainties, even if the Safer Banking Act is passed into law. However, it's in the process, hopefully, fingers crossed, of being rescheduled out of Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. In addition, while the Safer Banking Act provides comprehensive protections for banks and credit unions, it does not include specific protections for other capital markets participants and activities that are part of the same ecosystem. As a result, some industry watchers and critics of the act have raised concerns that it does not go far enough with respect to expanding access to credit and other sources of capital, which is essential given that the state legal cannabis industry is heavily regulated and thus requires a lot of capital. Yes, anyone who thinks that you can just go and open a corner store and start dealing, it's a lot more complicated than that. I had a friend who was going to do that, as a matter of fact, right up in Michigan. When he heard they were pushing for legalization, he's like, man, I'm buying a farm. I'm hooking this up. It costs millions of dollars to get into. This is not something that's designed for your average Joe to go be able to do. There are tons and tons of regulations, and you have to have this right and that right, and all this stuff costs money. It all costs money. Money. This is of particular concern to small and minority-owned businesses seeking to compete with much larger multi-state operators. The abbreviation for that is MSO, multi-state operators, MSOs. In states like New York, which contain significant restrictions on who can make investments in social equity applicant-owned businesses. What a mouthful, man.
Mm-hmm.
And on what terms? This leaves those operators in a difficult position of having a smaller pool of equity investors while at the same time having constrained access to credit. Now, I will say this. I've seen people, I've seen businesses struggle with funding. I've seen legislation that was intended to help them, but it only makes the process more complex. And so there's all these hoops you got to jump through in order, for example, to be able to loan to, say, like a minority-owned business, right? They qualify for special breaks, even though it's not exactly equality, but setting that to the side, my personal feelings aside, in order to do this, you create more hoops and more legal loopholes. And then a lot of companies are like, it's not even worth it. It's too much hassle. So their already small credit pool possibly gets even smaller. The crux of the issue is the limited definitions of, quote, financial service and, quote, depository institution, in quote, in the provisions of the Act providing safe harbor and other protections under federal law. These definitions do not explicitly include Securities and Exchange Commission regulated businesses or capital markets activities, such as investment banking, other broker-dealer activity, non-bank direct lending, asset management, custody of securities, and listing on U.S. stock exchanges, thereby limiting the bill's scope and effect. Therefore, one solution lawmakers could consider in the 2024 version of the bill would be to define financial service and depository institution more broadly to include such industry participants. And that is a good, a good way to think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to make sure that more people have access, in order to ensure that it's, because you've got narrow where, it's very focused legislation and it will help this X group of people. By making it broader, it might affect more, but then you have more people that have access to it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you.
I'm not sure which one, I'm in favor of, but it's certainly an interesting conversation to have, I think. What's next? Although the Safer Banking Act enjoys bipartisan support, it is in no way universal. A number of obstacles still remain, including the challenges of reaching consensus in the Senate and then moving the bill through a Republican-controlled House. It also remains to be seen what impact, if any, the Food and Drug Administration's recent recommendation to reschedule cannabis under federal law would have on these efforts. And we already know it would be much easier. Here's the thing, right? So with the reclassification, if it goes through to Schedule 3, will that make this act redundant or unnecessary, I should say? Or would it simply make it much easier for this to end up passed or in effect or whatever? What do you think?
I think it would be much easier.
I think it would provide, I think it's, go ahead.
I don't think it would be redundant.
I think it would still be a necessity because it's still illegal. It's still prohibited on a federal level, even though nobody gives a damn what the feds have to say anymore, apparently, at least on this. Here's the thing, right? You got cannabis, you got your sanctuary cities that refuse to comply with immigration. That's all okay. But God forbid we create a sanctuary state when it comes to the Second Amendment, right?
Yeah.
They'd lose their entire mind.
Oh, yes.
Look, I believe that the legalization or at least rescheduling to Schedule 3 is inevitable. It's going to happen, I think. And I wish more Republicans would. That I'll tell you, I truly believe that that's one of the reasons why the Republican Party struggles to attract younger voters. I think it's one of the reasons why they're so unpopular with millennials. Forget the stuff you see on CNN and the rage clicky type of BS. When you have a political party that it seems the vast majority are against something that most millennials and younger have easy, ready access to and just don't understand what the big deal is.
Yeah.
You tend to come off as out of touch.
And we've talked about this before, the disconnect.
Yes. And there is a vast disconnect between a lot of these politicians and the general public. But even so, focusing on the Republican Party for a moment, I ran as a Republican. I am a Republican. I'm on the ballot this year as a delegate for the Republican Party. I believe in the foundations and what the Republican Party was established on. But the modern party, I have my issues with, which is one reason why I'm running for delegate, because that's how we can affect change. But I do believe that there's a lot of room for education and a lot of room for these politicians to sit down and listen to the public. We just saw an article where it said 2/3 of Americans are in favor of legalization.
Yep.
2/3.
And
I don't think 2/3 of Americans agree on anything.
And a majority of Republicans, conservatives.
Right. Yeah.
I know of conservative people who are for
exactly
very conservative people that are for the legalization of marijuana.
Absolutely. And when I ran in 2020, I actually received the endorsement from Indiana Normal,
Yeah, I remember
which
that.
is the organization responsible, or the biggest organization responsible for the legalization. Why? Because I know what it is. I have not been, I did my research. I looked into it. I read about it. I listened to doctors. I listened to veterans. I listened to people that it helped. There have been multiple congressional hearings where people have stepped up and said, look, I took this. I saw this one guy. He had, I can't remember the name of it. It wasn't cerebral palsy, but it was something else that affected the nerves, right? And he had really bad shakes. And very shortly after consuming the I don't know if it was, I think it was CBD that he was given, the shakes just stopped. It was insane. I was like, whoa, that was nuts. And it's just one example. There's tons and tons of other examples.
I think I've seen that before.
Yeah. It's wild, man. It's wild.
It
And unfortunately, until these politicians start listening to the people, this is just one small example. So yeah, that's about it. Anything else you want to
Nope.
chime in on? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you again very soon. I'm Dion.
And I'm Shawn.
And this has been Face to Face, Triple D, or Dion's Daily Dose. I use the Triple D a lot. Triple D presents Face to Face with Dion and Shawn. I'm really glad you guys listened to me. I'm really glad you guys watched the show. And as always, God bless you. God bless Indiana. And God bless the United States of America. I hope you have a wonderful day.
If you'd like to support the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Dion's Daily Dose. This has been Dion's Daily Dose, hosted by Dion Bergeron. Executive producers, Sean Holgram and Michael Beebe. Copyright 2024. Dion's Daily Dose, all rights reserved.